Starting off, guys, with the worst card in the game, we got the Void Spell. It just pretty much gets no value, especially with the new addition of the Vine Spell. Now, I don't know why anyone would think to run the Void, which is why you pretty much see it in no deck, and sometimes you even forget that it even exists in the game. Next up, we got the Rune Giant. Ever since they gave her that nerf where she no longer permanently enhances things, she has been drastically worse. And even though she goes for buildings and towers, she's just a horrible win condition, dealing almost no damage. Now we got the Clone Spell, which is also a very weak spell like the Void, because there's so many things prevalent in the meta like arrows, poison, and even the Tornado, which is just going to counter the Clone very easily, which is why you pretty much never see it anymore, even with the Giant Skeleton and the Lava Hound. The Mirror's also very bad because spending one more elixir to play the same thing often just makes your cycle very awkward, which is why it pretty much never fits in any deck, and the only time you would ever see it is if a card is extremely broken and people are abusing it just to play that broken card again. But that's basically it. Barbarian Hut is the worst building in the game. It pretty much just gets no value for 6 elixir. It's too weak to spells. It doesn't fit well in any deck, and it probably just needs a rework like the other buildings got, like the Goblin Hut as well as the Furnace. The Healer is also a very weak card. You could maybe make her work if you really want to in Elixir Golem, but a lot of Elixir Golem decks nowadays don't even use the Healer. So she's just a very weak card in general. Same with the Skeleton Army. It's usually mostly just going to be in very off-meta mid-ladder decks. You pretty much never see it as a requirement in any deck. It used to be played in Giant Graveyard, but that's just really not the case anymore now that more evolutions are in the game and new spells get added that seem to just counter it pretty easily. The regular Barbarians are also a very bad card. Pretty much everyone that runs them for their evolution, because the standard version is not really viable on their own at all. Even inside of Lava Hound, there's just going to be way better options nowadays, like even the Valkyrie, for example, or another support card. The Rascals, they keep messing up the rework as well as the buff for the Rascals. They tried to reduce the damage the Rascal Girls dealt and buff the Rascal Boy, but it ended up backfiring because the Rascal Girls are worse, so they remain to be a very bad card still in a lot of mortar decks and bait decks. People just prefer other substitutes and options. They just don't get that much value. They're too vulnerable to spells. The Night Witch is also very bad because even though the Golem is back in this meta, she remains to be not played. Golem players want to run other support cards instead of the Night Witch because she just is weak overall, and the bats are very easy to deal with, especially with the Cannoneer not being as good after the Cannoneer nerf. When the Cannoneer's good, that's pretty much the main time you see the Night Witch being good because of the bats that she spawns, but at the moment, definitely not the case. The Three Musketeers are not in a great spot. They just tend to get worse and worse with new evolutions getting added to the game. They're just too expensive, and even though there's some big 3M enthusiasts out there, they just remain to be a very weak card in the meta and have very little success most of the time. We're going to start off D tier, guys, with the Dagger Duchess. She is without a doubt the worst tower troop in the whole game, far worse than the Cannoneer, as well as the Chef, of course, which just get way more value, and then, of course, the Princess Tower. She pretty much can only be played in maybe some sort of giant prince deck or maybe some bridge spam deck, but she's gonna be bad most of the time, and I don't know why someone would want to play her in 99% of scenarios. The Phoenix, guys, is very weak currently. A lot of the Royal Giant players nowadays prefer running things like the Evo Hunter or even the Evo Wizard. That the Phoenix has pretty much died out. There's pretty much no deck you want to use it in. Even though they buff the damage it deals, the death damage, when it drops the egg, it hasn't really done anything, and it still remains to be a very bad card. The Goblinstein is the worst champion for sure, in my opinion. Even though they recently buffed the amount of hit points he has by 4%, it has hardly done anything, and he might potentially still need another buff. At least that's how things seem at the moment. The E-Drag, guys, is not very good, the standard form. You pretty much need to use the evolution in order for the card to work, and it's pretty much the same story with the Goblin Cage, the Wizard, as well as the Zap, which is kind of why they're all next to each other. Not just because I want to emphasize it, but because I also truly think these cards are all weak and all kind of towards the bottom of D tier. because every single one of these cards without the evolution is just very, very weak. The E-Drag just doesn't get very much value, way too vulnerable to things like lightning. The Cage on its own, very inconsistent too, when you're not having that extra support against heavy units and beatdown. The regular version is just very weak. It just doesn't provide very much value at all. And the regular wizard is the same thing with spells without having that shield. And then the standard zap not having that evolution, you're not getting all those crazy interactions like double reset on top of an Inferno Drag or a tower, or being able to kill things like an Evo Firecracker or Evo Archers, for example. And the standard zap is just not really that good. Everyone running these cards, you need to run the evolution with it. The Goblin Demolisher is going to be next. They tried to give it a small buff recently. It hasn't really done very much, though, and you pretty much can only run it in Goblin Drill. That's about it, but even Goblin Drill doesn't typically play it. The Freeze is pretty bad. Ever since they added the Vines to the game, it has been even worse, because why would you use the Freeze when you can use the Vines, which is essentially a better version of it, and a lot of other spells in a lot of scenarios. The regular Archers guys are going to go in D tier. They're pretty much useless without the evolution, and even the Evo nowadays you mostly only see inside of Expo, so they're just not a very great card. I think they just die to arrows really easily, and you're just going to be better off running support cards that are better in majority of decks. Skeleton Dragons have been pretty bad recently. I don't know what it's been, but the meta shifted a lot. They used to be pretty good inside of Lava Hound decks and even in Mortar, but now pretty much no one is playing them. Probably a big part of it is because of the minions buff. It's just a way better flying card to have instead of the Skeleton Dragons, and that's probably the biggest reason behind it. The Skeleton Barrel, the standard version especially, definitely not that great. Very easy to take out with spells or distract with a building, for example, but you could use it maybe if you really want to inside of a Mortar deck or Recruit Spam, but I just think compared to the Evo, it's pretty weak overall. The Goblin Curse guys got a lot worse, going all the way from S to D tier ever since they ended up giving it that damage amplification nerf. I know it's a very sad change for a lot of Goblin Curse players, but it's now drastically worse, but you do still sometimes see it inside of Goblin Giant decks, especially, or with the Goblin Machine. It can be pretty solid. Recruits are going to be next. The standard Recruits guys are really not that good. They might be kind of annoying, but the Evo is where they're at. The Recruits, before the evolution was added, they were actually a really bad card and were lacking, and then the evolution kind of saved them, because when they're charging, they're significantly more scary. But the regular version, it's okay, but it's going to be pretty easy to defend most of the time, especially if you have a building and cheaper cards. These Zappies guys, they got slightly better when they gave them a small buff to their hit speed, but it hasn't made them anything crazy. You're still pretty much seeing them in the exact same decks as before, so I'm not really going to be able to put them much higher than D tier, but their defensive potential is definitely a little bit better than it was before, which is why I don't think they're F anymore. The Goblins guys are going to be in D tier as well, because pretty much the only deck they're in nowadays is Hog X NATO. Basically, every other deck, you're going to be better off running the Skeletons or the Guards or the Goblin Gang, so there's just better options. They just don't have too much versatility compared to a lot of the other options. The Heal Spirit guys is the worst spirit in the game. It does get some value inside of maybe Bridge Spam decks, but there's just generally going to be better options than the Heal Spirit, and it's not going to fit well unless you're running maybe some sort of off-meta Sparky deck and Bridge Spam, like I said. The E-Barbs guys is going to be next. They're very good at mid-ladder, especially if people have them over-leveled, but once you get better at the game and learn how to counter them, they're really not that great, because they're very easy to kite or counter with cheap units or air units, as long as you're managing your elixir properly. The Sparky guys is not that great, especially with the new addition of the Vine spell, which is just obviously such a great counter to it, since it resets the Sparky and keeps it in place, and then other spells in the meta that are pretty prevalent, like the Lightning, end up doing a pretty good job against it as well, and the Evo Zap. The Battle Ram, the regular version, is going to be in D tier. You pretty much have to use the Evo for this card to work, and even the Evo Battle Ram isn't in the best place in this meta, because there's a lot of good buildings and stuns that take care of it. so it has a hard time reaching the tower. The Expo, guys, is actually a pretty bad win condition currently, and it's because of the Vine spell getting released. The Vine spell is such a good counter to the Expo because it basically, even if the Expo locks on your tower, if you go in for the Vines, it's going to reset the Expo, so you basically have another chance of countering it. So it's really difficult for Expo decks to break through the Vines. So it went from being a very good win condition to one of the worst. Same with the Elixir Golem. Elixir Golem has been in a very bad spot in this current meta. I think that it's just been struggling with a lot of the broken Vines decks, and then even in general, just E-Golem has never really been that amazing in the meta, so I guess not a whole lot is changing. Mega Knight, guys, the regular version is not really that good. You pretty much have to use the Evo for it to be solid. Of course, the mid-ladder, it's a, I know it's a hated card, but I think if you know what you're doing, it's pretty easy to defend, and it's actually really easy to get a King Tower activation against it as well. If you have a couple units that don't have a ton of health, you know, one you have it to aggro it to jump on it, and then one just right in front of your King Tower, and then you can get a nice and easy activation if you know what you're doing. Executioner, guys, the standard version is very bad, and even the Evo nowadays, you mostly only see it in Hog X NATO and maybe Graveyard Freeze, but Graveyard Freeze usually is going to have Bowler and Evo Inferno Drag, so the regular Executioner is definitely not that good, and that's why it wasn't really that good or used ever until they added the evolution. The regular Bats, guys, fell off so much ever since the minions got the range buff. There's pretty much no reason to use the regular Bats. You have to use the Evo, but even the Evo Bats, guys, are in a really bad spot right now because of the minions. Not really much else to say beyond that. Magic Archer got a lot worse ever since they nerfed the Tornado, because Magic Archer decks were impacted the most by the Tornado nerf. Beatdown decks not as much, but minor Magic Archer definitely not nearly as good, and even P.E.K.K.A decks don't even really run the Magic Archer nowadays. Most of the P.E.K.K.A decks have the Chef in the Gob Giant in it, or other support cards like the Mother Witch, so the Magic Archer's in a really bad spot currently. The regular Hunter's also really bad. You pretty much have to use the Evo in order for it to be viable, but even the Evo Hunter isn't really that great right now compared to a lot of the other support cards in the games ever since they removed that perma net that it had. The Fly Machine, guys, we're going to start off C tier with it. The Fly Machine is alright in Recruits Hogs and Lava Hound occasionally, but there are going to be better options than it most of the time. Like, of course, the Minions, obviously, and I would even say the Mega Minion, which is next, by the way, ever so slightly better than the Flying Machine, in my opinion, even though it's close, because I feel like the Mega Minion is really solid in some of the beatdown decks currently, like maybe with Giant or something like that if you want to use it, or even Golem, you'll occasionally see it. But both of them are okay, but there's just definitely going to be better options that we're going to get to. The regular P.E.K.K.A, guys, is kind of okay, but I feel like most people are running her evolution. But the standard version does get a little bit of playtime, especially inside of Evo Battle Ram decks or maybe Ram Rider. People are going to run the regular P.E.K.K.A instead of the evolution, so she's definitely not bad and can definitely work even after the nerf she ended up getting a few months ago. The Giant Skeleton, guys, ever since they gave him that health buff, has definitely helped him a little bit. You see him occasionally inside of graveyard decks and things along those lines. He was actually more in B or A tier until recently. I feel like this meta, he has kind of been toned down a little bit, and I haven't seen him as often, but he's definitely still in a much better spot than he was before after the buff, and you can actually use him as a decent tank. The Inferno Tower is going to be next. I feel like it's an okay building, but there's just going to be better options than it, like the Cannon, for example, and other buildings we're going to get to that are just more consistent and cheaper, but it can be very good, especially against Lava Hound or Golem decks, but it's going to be really bad against Cycle and even Control, and I feel like that's kind of the main drawback of it, and the Vines are a pretty good counter to it as well. The Firecracker, ever since they nerfed her knockback, has been so much worse. She just is just a lot easier to hit her spells, hit your spells on top of her, and I think you can pretty much only use her inside of Hog now, and even a lot of Hog decks don't even run the Firecracker anymore, so she definitely got a lot worse. The Royal Hogs are kind of struggling, I would say, currently, because Royal Hog Cycle is in a really bad spot. The only people using Royal Hogs nowadays are with the Recruits, but I think some Recruit players don't even use the Royal Hogs. They might run maybe a Recruit bait deck or something else, so I don't even think the Royal Hogs are that great. Definitely a below average win condition currently. The Suspicious Bush isn't in an amazing spot because there's not as many people running the Boss Bandit Suspicious Bush deck anymore. It's mostly just seen in some off meta decks here and there. It can be annoying, but it's very easy to counter with spells and buildings, so it's a little bit of an inconsistent win condition, I would say. The Little Prince got a little better after the buff he got. I would definitely say now he's for sure objectively better than the Goblinstein, but I still feel like he's not that great and is just weaker compared to the other champions, which I'm going to get to later. But you could use him if you want now inside of a Miner deck or a Goblin Drill deck. I just think there's still going to be better options. The Minion Horde guys, kind of like the minions, got better after the range buff, but because they nerfed the hit speed of the minions, I think that affected the Minion Horde more than the minions, so they're definitely not B tier anymore, but I would say that they're still C tier because they're very solid inside of mortar decks, and the range buff has definitely helped them so much, and they're better than they were before a couple months ago for sure. The Bomb Tower guys is going to be pretty good inside of Loon Cycle especially, but I feel like it's not that amazing in many other things, so it's not really that versatile because even Goblin Drill decks don't even really run it anymore, and most of the time people are going to prefer the cannon over it, but it can be nice if, you know, you need a little bit of splash and a building that has a good amount of health, and I would say it's better than the Inferno for sure. The regular Gob Giant guys is going to be C tier. Some people might be surprised by this with how good the Evo Gob Giant is, but I think that really says a lot. The Evo Gob Giant is just significantly better than the regular Gob Giant, and because of the fact that it's not spawning the goblins, that's why everyone is running the evolution. You don't really see a single soul out there running the regular Goblin Giant without the Evo. Everyone has the Evo because that's where it's at, and then when that Evo is getting upgraded to level 16 from the Chef Tower, that's what's really broken because then it's spawning those goblins too that are a higher level, but when it's the regular one, it's a lot more manageable to deal with it, and that's why you always see the evolution. It's kind of the same with the Tesla too. The regular Tesla is okay, but I feel like it's not nearly as good as the evolution. Everyone running the Tesla has the Evo, like the Expo players that are running it, or the Goblin Drill players, the Hog players, because it's just going to help you significantly more defending the big pushes and, you know, when there's clumps of units. That's why the cannon, you know, spoiler because we haven't gotten to the cannon yet, but that's why I think the cannon, for example, is, you know, just a lot better because the regular version, you don't even have to use the Evo. The regular version is just a lot better in a lot of cases. The E-Giant, guys, has actually been slightly better recently because mostly though, it's because of the Evo Baby Dragon. It pairs so well with the E-Giant, and that has kind of helped to revive it a tiny bit. So I would say it's in C tier and not D anymore because Evo, Baby Drag, E-Giant is a pretty crazy combination that I've seen a good bit. And the Tombstone guys, this was actually in the wrong spot. It's supposed to be below the Inferno Tower. I think it got messed up the order. But the Tombstone guys is not really as good as it used to be. You pretty much only see it in Lava Hound nowadays, and it doesn't even get played in much anymore in Graveyard. So it's going to be at the bottom of C tier because it's mostly just Lava Hound. That's the only deck you see it in, and it's a weak spawner overall. The Valkyrie, guys, is going to be next. I feel like that she's okay, but compared to things like the Knight, she's just not nearly as good in my opinion. I know mid-ladder players really like running her, but I think that the Knight just gets more value in most circumstances, and that Splash can be nice sometimes in some scenarios, but most of the time you just end up having that, you want to have that tank, and it's not really about the Splash. But that's why the Evo is pretty much the best source of value for her, but the regular version isn't really that great. The regular Valk is pretty much never played except in mid-ladder. It's always the Evo. Same with the regular Goblin Barrel. Like, the regular Goblin Barrel, I actually think if it weren't for the Evo, it would be horrendous right now. But the regular barrel without the Evo is so bad. In fact, I'm actually going to have it at the bottom of C tier because it's a pretty difficult meta for bait right now. Bait is in a really rough spot, and the Evo barrel is the only thing carrying it because the regular barrel, even the vines counter it now. The vines are another way of countering the Goblin Barrel. It can fully counter it. So really rough meta for bait in general. The Monk, guys, is going to be next. The Monk is better than the Little Prince slightly, I would say, but ever since they gave him a nerf, you pretty much only see him inside of Royal Giant decks. That's it. So he's just not really that versatile at all anymore. I don't know if he needs a buff. I would say probably not, because there's champions worse, but that nerf definitely impacted him a ton. So it's just occasionally an RG now. That's it. The mortar guys, the regular mortar, not really that great compared to the evolution, but you can make it work even using the standard version and not the Evo in a couple decks, especially with Mortar Miner or Mortar Bait. It could be pretty good. Mortar actually pairs really well with the Minion Horde. I commonly see those two cards together, and like the Evo Skeleton Barrel, it can be really solid, but it's pretty easy to prevent it from getting a lock on your tower, especially in this current meta. The Royal Delivery is going to be okay. It's going to be very dependent on the matchup, I feel like. It's going to be pretty good in minor control, but overall, it's better to have spells that can actually reach your opponent's tower, and you have more flexibility of when you can play them besides just on your side of the map, but it's a pretty good defensive tool in a minor control deck. The Ice Golem is a bit better after the buff it got, but still you can pretty much only use it in Loon Cycle in 2.6. It hasn't really expanded into other decks that are more meta, so I can't really have it much higher. The regular Royal Giant, guys, is going to be next. It's okay, but I feel like everyone running it is always running the evolution, and even the Evo RG is not in the best spot in this current meta. I feel like it's just having a difficult time breaking through a lot of the buildings and the strong defensive decks at the moment as well. So I think it's kind of around an average or below average win condition. The Spirit Empress, guys, took quite a hit when she got the hit points nerf to her flying version, but I still think her ground form is pretty good, and even the flying version, people still play it occasionally, especially inside of things like Lava Hound. I feel like that's going to be like one of the decks she's best in, but she's not in like every deck in the game anymore. You can't even use her really with the Ram Rider anymore. It's pretty much just limited to, I would say, air decks in general, or maybe something like Golem. So she's definitely a lot more balanced now, or even on the weaker end. The Ewiz, guys, is mostly only good inside of bridge spam decks, especially with the P.E.K.K.A. I feel like there's just going to be better support card options than him, so I'm going to have him there. I think he's just an okay card. Same with the Mother Witch. I feel like it's kind of similar decks the Mother Witch is good in, like P.E.K.K.A. You might even see the Mother Witch and the Ewiz in the same P.E.K.K.A. deck. That's kind of a common combination you see nowadays instead of the Magic Archer. The Elixir Collector has made a little bit of a comeback with Golem being in a really good spot. No one's really running Three Musketeers with the pump, but Golem pump is a common thing in this meta, which I would say makes the pump C tier. I don't really think it's much higher, though, because I literally only see it in Golem, and that's it. I'm not really seeing it in Bridge Spam much anymore, or with the Three Musketeers, like I said. The Musketeer, I think, is next. She's going to be pretty good inside of Loon Cycle in 2.6, but beyond that, not really, and I just think there's going to be better support cards than her. The Lumberjack, guys, as well as the Witch, I feel like both of them, the evolution helps them so much more. Like the Evo Lumberjack is so much more broken than the regular Lumberjack. Same with the Evo Witch, but the reason why I have the Witch a lot higher than the Wizard, for example, in this meta is because the Witch is really good against the Vines, guys. Because when people go for Vines on top of the Witch, it doesn't kill her, and it kind of keeps her in place, which sometimes can benefit her, and then she spawns skeletons right after. And it's even more beneficial when it's the Evo Witch, but even the regular Witch, guys, is in a very good spot in this meta, which is why so many people are running the evolution of her, but I think even the standard version is way better than she normally is, which is why I literally have her at the top of C tier, the regular Witch, as hard as that is to believe, because she's good against the Vines. But if it's her evolution, that's what I would be putting significantly higher for sure. But the standard version's still not half bad in this meta. The Cannoneer, guys, is going to be the start of B tier. The Cannoneer is a lot better than the Dagger Duchess, which is why I have them in B tier and not in, obviously, C tier, because I think it's pretty decent in the right decks. Especially people that are running Mortar or Graveyard, he's going to be really solid for that extra DPS. And there's actually a lot of things in this meta, tanks, where he can be useful, but I don't think he's quite as good as the Princess Tower or the Chef, which is why I'm going to have him in B tier. I just don't think he's quite as strong, but you can use him if you want in whatever deck you think he would fit well in. The Cannon Cart, guys, is going to be next. I feel like it's okay inside of things like Mortar and Bridge Spam, but it's definitely not as broken as it was, but they gave it that little bit of a buff and they fixed it so it doesn't retarget. So that has helped it a lot, and I would say it's kind of a slightly above average card now. The Earthquake is okay, especially inside of Hog EQ, but Royal Hog Cycle isn't in a great spot currently with the pigs. It's just Hog you see it in, so definitely not A tier in this meta, but it can be a really nice counter to things like the Cannon and the Goblin Hut that a lot of people are using, obviously. The Dark Goblin is next. What's funny is the regular Dark Goblin I actually think is better than the Evolution now, ever since they nerfed the Evolution, but I think even the regular Dark Goblin isn't that amazing in this current meta because bait's not in a great spot, but I do think it's okay because even some Mortar decks sometimes run it, and it's very good with the Evo Skeleton Barrel and stuff like that. The Lava Hound, guys, isn't in a super good spot in this meta because of the Vines, because obviously the Vines can pull it to the ground. Normally I place it in A tier, but the Vines alone has made it significantly worse, and I think it's only in B tier right now because you can have something like a mini P.E.K.K.A. literally or a Prince start attacking it, which is kind of funny, but that's just how it is. The Fisherman, guys, is B tier. It's also a bit worse in this current meta because in this meta there's not as much Royal Giant, and a lot of the Goblin Giant decks too don't really tend to run Fisherman anymore. They're using other support cards like the Goblin Machine, for example, so the Fisherman has kind of slightly fallen out of the meta a little bit. The Rocket, guys, is also not as good as it typically is in this current meta because a lot of people are using, well, the Vines over it, and even the Lightning is going to be significantly better than it because it's a pretty heavy beatdown meta with things like Golem and even some more people running Electro Giant as well. So I feel like it's just not a great spot for the Rocket as much as usual, but you can use it inside of a Goblin Drill deck. But even bait is not that great anymore with the Rocket. The Bandit, guys, is going to be next. I feel like she can be pretty good inside of some Bridge Spam decks, but in this current meta, she's not anything crazy. It's just going to be like some P.E.K.K.A. decks if you want, or maybe like Evo Mega Knight or a Ram Rider deck, but definitely not as prevalent as she sometimes is. The Princess also, it's not the best meta she's seen because bait's not in an amazing spot. Vines is another pretty good counter to her because you can just go Vines when she's on the other side of the map, damage the tower and kill her. So it kind of makes sense why she's not that amazing. The Spear Goblins got a lot worse after they ended up getting nerfed, but I still think they're pretty good for getting chip damage, and they're going to be pretty good inside of Mortar decks for sure, and Miner, but they're definitely a lot worse for sure. The Fire Spirit's going to be pretty good for getting DPS and can get a lot of value for only one elixir, especially inside of Goblin Drill decks. That's going to be the best deck for the Fire Spirit, but beyond that, it's not really used too much inside of other things. The regular Goblin Drill is way better than the Evolution. I would say it's kind of a average win condition. It's going to be pretty good. A lot of different variations of it you can play, but it's definitely not one of the best win conditions, and it can be pretty challenging to play against a lot of the different beatdown decks in the meta. You have to be really good at defending. The regular Snowball is pretty good actually with things like the Goblin Drill or inside a Loon Cycle. Some people prefer playing it over the Evolution, even inside of things like Giant Graveyard. I think it's a pretty okay spell, but there's definitely better options than it. The Inferno Drag is going to be in B tier. It's alright in this meta, but things like the Vines are keeping it in check a lot more, and I think it's the reason why it's currently not any higher, like an A tier like I usually have it. Even the Evo Inferno Drag isn't in a super amazing spot in this current meta. The Dark Prince, guys, is going to be next. It's actually a lot better after they gave it a buff to the damage. It's also very good in a lot of the beatdown decks in this meta, like maybe inside a Golem or with the Evo Gob Giant. So the buff has definitely helped it out, and I would for sure say that he's a B tier card at the moment. The Wall Breakers are going to be next. They're definitely a very solid 2 elixir win condition, way more consistent at reaching the tower compared to something like the Suspicious Bush, but they're definitely not going to be nearly as good as the Evo Wall Breakers, for example. So the standard version is definitely, I would say, a bit more balanced and kind of average among a lot of the win conditions in the game. The regular Baby Dragon without the Evolution is honestly not that OP. The Evolution is really where it's at, but I think in this specific meta, even the regular Baby Dragon is in a really good spot because it just pairs so well with a lot of the beatdown decks that are very good, like especially Golem and E-Giant, for example, and even the Evo Gob Giant, a lot of people are running with the Baby Dragon. So the regular version still, I would say, gets a good bit of value, which I think really helps the evolution be even better than it is, considering the fact that the standard version is good. The standard version of the Baby Dragon definitely way better than the standard version of the Witch, for example. The Archer Queen, guys, is okay in this meta, but Royal Hog Cycle is not in a great spot, so she's actually kind of limited of the decks she can be played in, but she's going to be very good with the Prince, especially inside of like an Evo Mega Knight deck or something like that, some kind of bridge spam deck, and maybe Royal Hog Cycle if you want to play it, but that's not really great at the moment, which is why I think she's just kind of an okay win condition, but not in the best spot in this meta. The Giant, guys, is also kind of a decent card in this meta. Giant Graveyard especially, but most people prefer running the Evo Gob Giant instead of the Giant and the Golem in this meta, but Giant Graveyard is going to be the deck that he's best in, I would say, and maybe a Prince spam deck. The Bowler, guys, is going to be really good inside of Graveyard. Graveyard Freeze especially, he just has so much defensive potential. I feel like he's not very versatile. I feel like that's the main thing that keeps him in check and why he's not any higher than that, in my opinion. The Ramrodder, she's actually in a pretty decent spot in this meta because of the Vines. She pairs very well with the Vines because the Vines kind of hold the unit in place, and then she can kind of snare whatever it is while the Vines are keeping that unit stuck, and the Vines also help her get through buildings and stuns, like the Zappies maybe, or an Ewiz or something, and I think that's why she's in a much better spot. Sometimes she's played with P.E.K.K.A. You can even use her without the Mega Knight or the P.E.K.K.A. though, just in maybe a bridge spam deck. The Golden Knight, I would say, is a bit better than the Archer Queen currently. He's going to be pretty good in a lot of the bridge spam decks that people are playing, and even inside of some heavier things like E-Giant, for example, he's going to fit very well in, and he can be annoying, his dashes especially, if you're using a deck where a lot of things are vulnerable to the dash and you don't space things out properly. The Balloon, guys, almost always goes in A tier. This is one of the first times where I'm actually going to put it in B tier, and it's because, guys, of the Vines. They can pull the Balloon to the ground, and then it's like the rest is history. So it's not as good because it can just get pulled to the ground and a mini P.E.K.K.A. or a Prince could attack it, which is kind of insane. So yeah, that's why it's a lot worse. And I wouldn't even say it's much better than the Lava Hound in this meta. The Ghost is going to be next, definitely a bit better than something like the Bandit, because the Ghost, more decks you can use it in. You can use it in Royal Giant, but because Royal Giant's not amazing currently, that's why I only have the Ghost inside of B tier. The mini P.E.K.K.A. definitely a bit better after the buff it ended up getting, and in this specific meta with all the people running the Evo Gob Giant and even some Golem decks running the mini P.E.K.K.A. and he's a good counter to a lot of the other beatdown decks. That's why the mini P.E.K.K.A. is pretty dang good at the moment, I would say for sure. We're going to start off, guys, A tier with the Chef. The Chef is the second best tower troop in the game without a doubt. Does he compare to the Princess Tower, how good the Princess Tower is? Definitely not, which is why he's an A and not S. But he's the reason why things like the Evo Gob Giant, Golem are in an amazing spot currently. It's because of this guy right here leveling them up, making it absolutely obnoxious for people to deal with. Of course, his defensive potential is way worse, but his offensive capability is ridiculous, and that is what makes him broken and what a lot of people consider kind of the culprit of this toxic meta, some people would say. People that do consider it toxic. The Hog Rider, guys, is going to be next, though. One of the best win conditions in the game, for sure. The best cycle win condition, I would say, currently in this meta, because not only is there Hog EQ, there's also Hog X NATO, there's 2.6, some off-meta Hog deck you could play with the Vines or something, or the Freeze. There's always going to be a good Hog deck you can play, and definitely a solid win condition in this meta. The Bomber, guys, is going to be next. I feel like it's just a really good 2 elixir card, and the regular version I would say is better than the Evo. At least recently that's been the case. You can use them in cheap decks like Goblin Drill, for example, but it's also going to be very good inside of heavier things like maybe with the Lava Hound and the Gob Giant, for example. You can make him work in. The Miner, guys, has been a lot worse recently. I almost always have him in S tier, but finally, I think after all the nerfs he's ended up getting, he's definitely a bit worse now that the hit rate isn't as often. He doesn't get as much chip damage on the tower. And also, just with this current meta, I feel like he's just difficult to use. It's just difficult to run minor control currently. So you really just don't see him as much as you did before. Is he completely bad or dead? No, far from that, but he's just a lot worse and not used nearly as much. The regular Furnace guys is going to be an A tier. The evolution is really where it's at, but the standard version is still very good, I would say, but just not nearly as good as the evolution. And now that it dies to poison, well, that partly is the reason why poison's so OP in this meta, but that definitely keeps it in check, the standard version anyway. The Mighty Miner guy is definitely one of the best champions in the game. It's really good inside of things like recruits and also inside of hog decks and goblin drill, things like that. It's a pretty versatile evolution, I would say, and it can be pretty useful against tanks as well. The Ice Spirit guys, I'm going to have it in A tier. Surprisingly, in this meta, I genuinely think that the E-Spirit is better than the Ice Spirit. And after the nerf that the Ice Spirit ended up getting, I actually think that dropped it out of S tier and put it in A tier. And it's also not great in this beatdown meta because there's just less cycle decks in general. The Tornado guys, even after the nerf, is still in A tier because it's really good in a lot of the heavy decks in this meta, like with Golem, Graveyard, for example, E-Giant, and just some other things. The Tornado is going to pair very, very well with. The Golem guys, this is the first time we've seen this in a very long time, is 100% an A tier. He is in a great spot in this current meta. It's just been insane, especially with the Chef Tower Troop, and also the Golemite buff has helped revive Golem so much. So many different variations you can play with a bunch of different evolutions. The Evo Lumberjack, for example, maybe the Evo E-Drag, the Evo Zap, the Evo Furnace, the Evo Witch, just the list goes on and on. The Evo Baby Drag, of course, he's just amazing. And I never thought we'd see the Golem in A tier. It's been such a long time. The Fireball guy is definitely not as good as the Poison in this current meta because there's not as many people running Expo or something like that with the Fireball or Royal Giant Fireball. It's definitely not bad. I'm seeing it especially inside of things like Lava Hound still and maybe a Giant deck or some Evo Gob Giant deck, but it's not as good as it normally is because of the current meta. The Goblin Gang is going to be next. Ever since they nerfed the Spear Goblins, it's no longer S tier, and I would say things like the Skeletons and the Guards are going to be a slightly better option, but it's going to be very good inside of Bait and Mortar, of course. The Boss Bandit, guys, believe it or not, I actually don't think she's the best champion in the game at the moment. After all the balance changes, for example, the Spirit Empress getting nerfed and the Evo Furnace and things like that, and also with this beatdown meta, she hasn't quite been as good because I actually feel like a lot of people prefer running the Prince over the Boss Bandit because the Boss Bandit is just a bit too expensive to run in something like Golem or even Evo Gob Giant. People are preferring the Prince over her, and you're never going to have the Prince and the Boss Bandit in the same deck. So that's actually my reasoning for having her not even as the best champion currently. The Rage guys is going to be next. Ever since they nerfed the Rage a little bit, it has been a bit worse, but it's still going to be very good with the Evo Gob Giant, for example, and maybe something toxic like Elixir Golem, but it's not as versatile as it used to be. You can't just plop it inside of any deck anymore. Skeletons guys better than the Evo Skeletons, in my opinion, but because Cycle's not that great this meta compared to Beatdown and Control, I don't think they're S tier currently. I think that the Guards just get a bit more value than them, but they're going to be very good inside of Cycle decks or RG, for example, and I still think for one Elixir they just get so much value. In my opinion, guys, the Skeleton King is the best champion in the game currently. I think one of the biggest reasons for this is actually because of the fact that Graveyard is in such a great spot, and also things like Evo Mortar Bait, the Skeleton King pairs very well in my opinion, and also what was I gonna say? I think in general none of the champions right now are actually that broken, but I think that the Skeleton King is currently the best one because of this kind of beatdown meta, and I feel like the Skeleton King just pairs very well inside of heavy decks, essentially, if that makes sense. So that's why I think it's the best champion currently, but none of the champions are broken in S tier, in my opinion. A little bit of a spoiler. The Log guys is going to be next. First time I'm not having the Log in S tier. That really goes to show where the meta's at. I don't think the Log is S tier. Like, call me crazy. I genuinely do not believe it is S tier because Barb Barrel's being used significantly more. It has actually changed so much the meta recently this month with how things have been. The vines might maybe have been the thing that dropped log down to A tier guys. I know it's insane, but there's just less people running it. Even some cycle decks like Hog are putting in Barb Barrel instead of the log now. As crazy as that sounds. It's just because the log isn't as good against things like the Evo Furnace that a lot of people are running. And people have found out it's also not as good against things like the Goblin Drill, for example, compared to a Barb Barrel. And bait's not in the best spot, so because of that, people don't need to use log as much anymore. But it's still a very good card, which is why I have it towards the top of A tier. The Ice Wizard, guys, is a great card currently. An absolutely phenomenal support card because Graveyard is in a great spot right now. And you can use him in something like Golem as well. He just gets a lot of value defensively ever since they increased his splash radius. Definitely a very, very good meta for the Ice Wizard without a doubt. Just the defensive potential he has for only 3 elixir is pretty insane. The Cannon, guys, I think is, yeah, one of the best buildings in the game right now. Even the standard version, not even the evolution, just gets so much value, which is why pretty much every cycle deck that people are still playing, whether it's Hog or people that are still running bait and people that run Goblin Drill, a lot of them run the cannon. Also, E-Giant decks, for example, like to run the cannon as well oftentimes, and even some graveyard decks. It just gets so much value for only 3 elixir, and even against air, like a balloon, for example, you're still distracting the balloon and taking a balloon shot, which is very, very valuable for only 3 elixir. The arrows, guys, are going to be going in A tier. They're definitely a bit worse after the radius nerf they ended up getting, without a doubt. And I think the vines also definitely keep them out of S tier without a doubt because they're just not getting as much value in comparison, but they're definitely still not a bad card. They're going to be very good inside of things like Mortar, of course, or maybe a Bridge Spam deck, a P.E.K.K.A deck. So they're definitely still very useful, but they're also not as much of a requirement, with bait not being an amazing spot currently, kind of like why the log, I don't think, is in S tier any longer. Lightning, guys, is going to be how we're going to close out A tier. The Lightning is definitely better than the Rocket in this meta because the Lightning pairs very well with things like the Golem, for example, or the Evo Goblin Giant, which just so many people are running, and the Lightning is a way for people to get through a lot of the buildings, to have a nice reset for their beat down cards to be able to get through things like maybe an Inferno Drag or an Inferno Tower. And even though the vines kind of have a reset too, I feel like it's lacking the radius that the Lightning has, which is why a lot of people still run the Lightning. We're going to start off, guys, S tier with the Princess Tower. Without a doubt, as good as the Chef Tower is at the moment, when you have around 60% or even 70% of the top 200 running the Princess Tower, that definitely alone proves that she's still kind of the best tower troop. There's no question, and I think a lot of people prefer that because I think if we had one of these other tower troops get to the point like the Chef, where literally half of the top 200 was running it instead of what it currently is, around 20 or 30%, I think that would be a problem. So I don't know about you guys. I think that, Princess Tower being the most used, I think that's what people want. She's just the most consistent, versatile. You can't really go wrong with her most of the time. Even inside of Golem decks and Evo Gob Giant, you'll occasionally see her because people just like using her. They know her interactions. She's got a good amount of health. Yeah, I mean, pretty much, well, they've been in the game forever. Everyone knows how she works. The Prince, guys, is going to be next. The Prince, in my opinion, guys, is definitely better than the Boss Bandit currently because with how good the Golem is and the Evo Gob Giant, you're not seeing the Boss Bandit in those types of decks, but you're seeing the Prince, right? The Prince just pairs so well in those decks. You have the tank in front, the Prince behind, and it can be absolutely obnoxious to deal with. And a lot of people I know really want the Prince to get a nerf, and I would say in this meta, he's definitely S tier. So if the Prince does end up getting a nerf, it would definitely be as a result of this meta. So we'll see if that ends up being the case. The Graveyard, guys, in my opinion, is the best win condition in the game currently. Graveyard, especially when paired with the Poison as well as the Gob Hut, by the way, which are also going into S tier, probably not a big surprise to a lot of people. These three cards have an insane combination. The poison's really good in this meta with the graveyard because there's still a lot of people running the Evo Furnace, right? Which the poison kills, but the vines can't. But that's actually why you often see the vines and the poison together in a lot of the graveyard decks. Now, the graveyard, though, is really good because not only is there graveyard poison with the Goblin Hut, for example, there's also graveyard freeze. Graveyard freeze is a very effective combination as well that people are running with the Evo Inferno Drag or the Evo Executioner, for example. And then, of course, there's even some people still running Giant Graveyard. Graveyard is just in a great spot at the moment because the vines are also not that good of a counter to the graveyard. Pretty much, guys, in this meta, the things that the vines do not do good against tend to be the better win conditions. So that's why the graveyard is pretty dang good. And things like the Hog Rider. Because unlike things like the Balloon, for example, well, the vines are not impacting them as much, if that makes sense. So that's why I think the graveyard is in such a good spot in this meta. And the the Goblin Hut, guys, I didn't talk much about that. I think it's the best building in the game currently, especially because of graveyard, but not even only graveyard decks. I feel like it's seen in a lot of other things. With the E-Giant, for example, as well, it's commonly seen in, or I'll see it sometimes still with the Miner, for example, and just some other things. I feel like it's a pretty versatile building, and a lot of people are saying it still has a lot of strength, and it just pairs well with a lot of the other strong cards in this meta, for example. The Knight, guys, is going to be in S tier. I think that no matter what the meta is, he just remains to be very, very consistent. I think that he just has good stats for the cost. I'm not even necessarily saying he needs a nerf. I really don't think he does. But he's just a very solid card, and he pairs very well with the graveyard as well. So it's probably not surprising why he's very good in this meta. But even inside of things like Hog and Expo, Goblin Drill, he's just very good, has a lot of health. The Goblin Machine, guys, this is a surprising one, but it's actually really broken in this current meta, especially when paired with the Chef, but not even only the Chef, guys. Like, there's so many people just running it with a bunch of different beatdown decks, whether it's Giant, Goblin Giant, Golem. It's been kind of ridiculous recently, I'm not going to lie. I don't know how it went all the way from being basically a C tier card all the way up to S tier, but it also finished #1 in the world last season inside of Evo Gob Giant. It's just very strong, especially when paired with the Chef. There's no question. The guards, guys, are going in S tier. I definitely think they're better than the Skeletons as well as the Goblin Gang in this specific meta because they're kind of a nice counter to things like the Prince, especially in a lot of these heavy decks, because a lot of these heavy decks with tanks, the guards are a great way of dealing with the support cards, I feel like, behind the tank, and they also survive arrows, which is pretty cool, and I don't think the vines are that amazing against them, because someone uses the vines to kill them. I feel like it's not the most amazing value, because as a 3-for-3 trade, and then maybe something else that they would have preferred to use the vines on, then they don't have it for them. So it's kind of a weird way of thinking about it, but I just think in this meta, they're quite good, and they compare well in a lot of different decks, like whether it's Mortar or a Lava Hound deck. So whether it's a cheap deck or an expensive deck, you can have the guards in it. The E-Spirit guys, I think, are it's a lot better than the Ice Spirit, in my opinion, in this meta. Especially, you're even seeing it now inside of Ram Rider again. There's a P.E.K.K.A. Ram Rider deck with the E-Spirit, but not even only that. RG, of course, it's going to be good in. Hog decks typically have the E-Spirit now, too, over the Ice Spirit in a lot of scenarios. And I forget what another deck was I was going to say. Royal Giant's not played as much, but of course that's usually going to have the E-Spirit. I think because it's a really good counter to things like the Graveyard, that's why a lot of people are running it over the Ice Spirit, and I just think the Ice Spirit nerf, people really realized how impactful it was, so a lot of people just switched to the E-Spirit, especially in decks where the King activation doesn't matter as much. The Berserker, guys, is definitely one of the best cards in the game. A big part of it is because of the versatility. You can just fit it in so many different decks. Of course, it's going to be very good inside a Graveyard, but there's a lot of people running it in a variety of different things, whether it's the Goblin Drill, for example, a Golem deck people are using her in. Sometimes even the Evo Goblin Giant has it. It's just kind of ridiculous, the amount of decks the Berserker can be played in. And she's got a lot of health for 2 Elixir, does a good amount of DPS, and she just fits well in so many different things. I think like even to another level than the Knight, which is why I think she's better than the Knight currently. The Minions guys are still top 3 card in the game, even though they got the hit speed nerf. They've still been really broken with the range. I think we can't deny that. It might be this current meta. Obviously, the Evo Gob Giant pairs very well with the Minions. The Golem pairs pretty well with the Minions as well. And Giant Graveyard, they're going to be pretty good with the Minions too. A lot of the Mortar decks have Minions if they don't have the Minion Horde in it. They pair very well with the Miner. The Miner decks you do see nowadays almost always have the Minions in it. And they might still need an additional nerf. It's possible that the nerf they got to their hit speed was not enough, because pretty much no one uses the bats anymore because of the range buff that the Minions got. They are just so good. The Barbarian Barrel, guys, is the second best card in the game, in my opinion. I don't know what happened, but basically almost half of the top 200 is playing it. It's replaced Log in so many decks. A big part of it is probably just because it's a beatdown meta. You're going to be able to run the Barbarian Barrel and things like Golem, Evo Gob Giant, Graveyard, E-Giant. Just a lot of heavy decks. It's just so good in heavy decks. Royal Giant too, it's replaced the Log a lot of times, and even some Hog players are using it. It's a good counter to things like the Goblin Drill. It's a good counter to the Evo Furnace. It's just a good counter to a lot of the strong cards in this meta, and you can almost always get away with using it because bait's, quite frankly, just not really in the best spot right now. So a lot of people have just switched to the Barb Barrel, and it kind of makes sense because the Log ended up getting a lot of nerfs, and we switched to a beatdown meta. So logically, it does make sense that this kind of ended up being the case. And the Vines guys, yeah, this probably is not a surprise to anyone. It is the best card in the game. They gave this card an emergency nerf, and I don't even know how this is possible, but it almost feels like the emergency nerf did nothing. Now, I'm recording this video. I want to make this very clear. I'm recording this video September 8th. And it's possible they're going to emergency nerf it before the season is over. That's possible, but I'm saying this as of now. After the first emergency nerf they gave it, it's hardly done anything at all. It still kills all the same things. It's still able to kill things like archers, the princess, the firecracker. It freezes things for quite a long time, way longer than a zap. Not quite as long as the freeze, but long enough, that's for sure. You can fit it in every deck in the game, pretty much. I mean, do you want me to name everything? Because it's literally everything. It's being used in Graveyard, it's being used in Gob Giant, it's being used in Golem, it's being used in Hog Rider, it's being used in Ram Rider, it's being used in Giant, it's being used in Goblin Drill, it's being used in E-Giant. It's you basically can use it in every single deck in the game. The emergency nerf did pretty much nothing, and it single-handedly changed just about the whole meta. It's basically the reason why the regular Witch is not completely dead and is at the top of C tier or even B tier. It's because of the Vines. So that's basically it. I think no one's going to question the Vines being the best card in the game. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe. You can use creator code BOSS to support me in any Supercell game, and let me know in the comments below what you guys agree and disagree with.